3 out of 4 suicides are men. That's not a typo. It's a global crisis hiding in plain sight, and the reason why might surprise you. Before we dive in, I want to be clear about something. This video isn't about blame. It's not about saying one gender has it worse than another. Suffering isn't a competition. This is about shining a light on a specific crisis that's been hiding in the shadows for far too long. The statistics we're about to explore are confronting. If you or someone you know is struggling, please know that help is available. I've put crisis helpline numbers in the description below. This isn't just a video about a problem. It's about understanding why it's happening, and most importantly, what we can do about it. This topic matters. It's personal for many of us, so let's approach it with the seriousness, the empathy, and the honesty it deserves. Let's talk about why so many men are dying in silence, and how we can break that silence before it's too late. Section 1. The problem. The scale of the crisis. Suicide is the leading cause of death for men under 50 in the UK. Not car accidents, not heart disease, suicide. In 2022 alone, over 5,600 people in the UK died by suicide, and 75% of them were men. That's roughly 14 men every single day. To put that in perspective, that's a man dying by suicide every hour and 40 minutes in the UK alone. This isn't just a UK problem, it's a global epidemic. In the United States, men account for nearly 80% of all suicide deaths. In Australia, it's around 75%. Canada sees similar numbers. Across nearly every country with reliable data, the pattern is the same. Men are dying by suicide at rates 3 to 4 times higher than women. This is one of the most consistent and stark gender disparities in all of public health, and yet it remains one of the least talked about. These aren't just statistics. These are fathers, sons, brothers, friends, colleagues. These are men who to the outside world often seemed fine. Men who were told their whole lives to be strong, to provide, to never show weakness. And in their darkest moment, that same conditioning told them they had to face it alone. Let's zoom in on the UK for a moment to really understand the human cost. The highest suicide rates are among men aged 45 to 49, followed closely by men aged 50 to 54. These are men in the middle of their lives, often at a point where they're supposed to have it all figured out. They might be dealing with the pressure of providing for a family, the stress of a demanding career, the quiet crisis of a failing marriage, or the shame of financial struggle, and they're doing it in silence. Geographically, suicide rates are higher in the most deprived areas of the UK. In the most deprived neighbourhoods, the male suicide rate is more than twice as high as in the least deprived areas. Poverty, unemployment, and lack of access to support services create a perfect storm. Men in these communities face not only economic hardship, but also the stigma and isolation that come with it. Occupation also plays a devastating role. Men working in construction, agriculture, and other manual labour industries have some of the highest suicide rates. These are often jobs with high physical demands, job insecurity, and workplace cultures that discourage talking about mental health. A construction worker is 3 times more likely to die by suicide than the average man in the UK. Think about that. The very men building our cities, our infrastructure, our homes, are silently falling apart. And here's the most heartbreaking part: suicide is often preventable. Research shows that many people who die by suicide had contact with a healthcare professional in the weeks or months before their death, but their distress went unrecognized or untreated. The signs were there, but the silence was louder. The scale of this crisis is staggering, but numbers alone don't explain why this is happening. To understand that, we need to look deeper at the invisible forces shaping how men live, suffer, and too often die in silence. Section 2. The agitation. The why behind the silence. We've seen the terrifying scale of the problem, a global crisis hidden in plain sight, but the numbers, as powerful as they are, only tell us what is happening, not why. To understand why so many men are dying, we have to look past the statistics and at the invisible rules of masculinity itself, the unspoken expectations and cultural pressures that create a perfect storm of silent suffering. The journey to why starts in childhood. From a young age, boys are handed a set of instructions on how to be a man. This conditioning is so deep in our culture that we often don't even see it. It's just how things are. Boys are told not to cry, to be tough, to man up, while girls are often raised to be communicative and emotionally open. Boys learn that their inner world is something to be controlled, and most of all, hidden. Vulnerability isn't just seen as a bad trait, but as a total failure of being a man. Expressing sadness, fear, or doubt is treated like a weakness. This isn't just peer pressure, it comes from family, from the media, from the words we use every day. Think about Boys Don't Cry. It's not a suggestion, it's a command. It teaches a boy that a core part of being human, feeling and showing sorrow, is off limits. As life coach LaToya Cameron Hill puts it, these expectations force men to bottle up their emotions and suffer in silence. They learn to hurt and just suck it up. This leads to what psychologists call emotional suppression. Men often end up with a limited emotional vocabulary, where feelings like anxiety or depression get flattened into a more acceptable masculine expression: anger or irritability. This is why depression can look so different in men, often missed by loved ones and even doctors, who see aggression when they should be seeing despair. Let me show you what this looks like in real life. A man named David, 32, works in construction. One morning, his crew is joking around during break. Someone mentions his buddy just started therapy. The jokes come fast. What's he gonna do, cry about it? Does his therapist give him a pacifier? David laughs along. But here's what nobody knows. David has been having panic attacks in his truck before work for 3 months. He'll never mention it now. He just learned the price of honesty. This is the pressure cooker in action. When you bottle up emotions, they don't just disappear, they're trapped. And the internal pressure starts to build. Every problem at work, with money, in a relationship, turns up the heat. Without a release valve, without being able to talk about it, the pressure keeps building until it just can't be contained anymore. The result can be a sudden explosive outburst or a catastrophic internal collapse. For way too many men, suicide is that final moment the pressure cooker gives way. This conditioning leads directly to a deep fear of judgment. Men are less likely to go to therapy, not because they don't need it, but because they're afraid of being seen as weak. In one survey, 4 in 10 men said it would take thoughts of suicide or self-harm before they'd even consider seeking professional help. For millions of men, the only time they'd ask for help is when they are standing on the edge of life and death. Help isn't seen as a tool for well-being, it's a last resort. Before we go further, there's a clinical reality we need to address. Men are more likely to use more lethal means when they attempt suicide. This isn't about intent, it's about access and impulsivity. It means that even when men and women experience the same level of despair, men are more likely to die. This is a tragic factor in these statistics, and it's why early intervention matters so desperately. Now, let's talk about the external pressures that push men toward that edge. But here's where it gets even more devastating. These internal rules don't exist in a vacuum. They collide head-on with the brutal realities of modern life. And the biggest collision point, the expectation that a man's worth equals his paycheck. For generations, a man's worth has been tied to his ability to earn money and support his family. Many men take this role incredibly seriously, and not being able to fulfill it can feel like a deep personal failure. This is why money trouble is such a major risk factor for male suicide. Losing a job or struggling with debt isn't just a practical problem. For many, it's an existential crisis. It attacks the very core of the identity they've been taught to build, and it feels like a public announcement of a private failure. This pressure helps explain why suicide rates are higher in deprived areas, and among men in jobs where employment is less stable. The third devastating ingredient is isolation. The male loneliness epidemic isn't just a hashtag, it's a documented public health crisis. In the United States, the number of men who say they have no close friends has jumped 5-fold since 1990. Think about your grandfather's generation. Men who had poker nights, bowling leagues, union halls. Now picture the average man today. Work, home, screen, repeat. The way men often build friendships contributes to this. Their relationships are shoulder to shoulder, built around doing things together like sports or work, but they often lack the face-to-face intimacy of actually talking about what's going on inside. This leaves many men with dozens of contacts in their phone, but nobody to call at 2 a.m. when the walls are closing in. This isolation becomes incredibly dangerous during big life changes, especially relationship breakdowns. Divorce or separation is a massive risk factor for male suicide. For many men, their partner is their main, and sometimes only source of emotional support. When that relationship ends, they can be left completely adrift, losing their partner, their home, their daily routine, and their only confidant, all at once. The shame tied to a failed marriage, combined with that sudden deep isolation, creates a perfect storm. Workplace culture often makes this worse. Even with corporate wellness programs, many work environments don't encourage open conversations about mental health. A shocking 40% of workers worry about telling their boss about a mental health struggle, fearing it will be held against them. Even more telling, only 13% feel comfortable discussing mental health openly at work. For men already taught to hide vulnerability, this workplace silence becomes another brick in the wall. Let's make this real. Imagine a man named Mark, 48 years old. He's worked at the same factory for 25 years, just like his dad. He's a supervisor, a good provider. He has a wife, 2 kids, a mortgage. His whole identity is built on being the rock. Then one day the plant announces it's closing. Mark is laid off. The first thing he feels isn't anger, it's shame, a gut punch that takes his breath away. He knows it's not his fault, but he feels like a complete failure. He's supposed to be the provider. He stops hanging out with his work buddies because he can't face them. And besides, what would they talk about now? His friendships were built shoulder to shoulder on the factory floor. Without that shared space, without that daily rhythm, the connection just evaporates. At home, he's quiet and irritable. His wife tries to talk to him, but he brushes her off. "I'll handle it," he says, falling back on the old script. He doesn't want to be a burden. He spends his days scrolling through job sites, feeling more and more worthless with every rejection. He feels totally alone. The phone number for a counseling service sits on the counter. He walks past it every morning. Every morning, he doesn't pick it up. Therapy is for other people, he thinks. He just lost his job. He should be able to handle this. The pressure builds. The shame turns into quiet despair. The silence in his own house becomes a crushing weight. Mark's story might be a fiction, but it's the reality for millions of men. It's where the rigid rules of masculinity, the weight of being the provider, and the lonely landscape of modern life all crash together. This is the why. It's a tangled web of social conditioning, impossible expectations, and deep isolation, all playing out in a culture of silence. It's a script that teaches men to be strong, but denies them the tools for real resilience. It tells them to carry the world on their shoulders, but forbids them from ever admitting the weight is too heavy. It's a system that is quite literally killing them. Section 3. The solution, breaking the silence. We've stared into the darkness. We've seen the numbers, the pressure, the isolation. And if you're feeling heavy right now, good. That means you're paying attention. But here's what the statistics don't show. Suicide is preventable. Not sometimes, not in theory, preventable. The path forward doesn't ask men to become someone they're not. It asks them to expand what strength means. And it starts with one revolutionary act that's been forbidden for too long: telling the truth. For generations, we've thought strength was a tough, uncomplaining exterior. The man who never flinches, who carries every burden in silence. That's been our icon of strength. But that's a brittle kind of strength. It's like a dam holding back a rising flood. It holds and holds and holds, until one day a crack appears, and the whole thing gives way. True strength isn't the absence of vulnerability, it's the courage to face it. True strength isn't pretending you're not struggling, it's being honest enough to admit that you are. Think about it. What takes more courage, to suffer in silence while you're falling apart inside, or to turn to someone you trust and say the 3 hardest words, "I'm not okay"? Seeking help isn't a weakness. It's one of the strongest things a person can do. It's admitting you value your life enough to fight for it. This redefinition of strength is the foundational shift. From there, we can build practical, real steps to help men who are struggling and create a more supportive world for everyone. The first step is simple but revolutionary. Start one conversation. For a guy who spent his whole life bottling things up, the idea of opening up can sound terrifying. The advice to just talk about your feelings can feel like being told to climb Everest in flip-flops. So let's make it smaller. The goal isn't to suddenly share everything. The goal is to find one person, just one that you trust. A partner, a sibling, a friend who's always been a good listener. You don't need a big speech. Here are 3 texts you can send right now. To a friend: "Hey man, I know we usually keep it light, but I'm going through something and could use your ear." Coffee this week? To a partner: "I need to tell you something I've been holding in. Can we talk tonight without distractions?" To a sibling: "Remember how we used to talk about everything as kids? I need that version of us right now. Call me when you can." The point isn't perfection, it's honesty. And the response you'll get will almost always be, "I'm here, what's going on?" The point of this first conversation isn't to solve everything. It's just to break the seal of silence, to prove to yourself that you can voice your pain and the world won't end. You'll likely find that person responds not with judgment but with compassion. This one act can create a tiny crack in the dam, a release valve for all that pressure. The second crucial step is to find your community. As we've seen, isolation is a huge driver of this crisis. The antidote is connection. This doesn't have to mean joining a formal support group, though those can be amazing. It means actively looking for places where you can build real connections. Re-engage with old hobbies. Join a local sports team, a book club, a hiking group, a volunteer organization. Find something that puts you shoulder to shoulder with other people who share an interest. These shared activities are often the doorway to deeper conversations. Real talk often happens in the quiet moments after a game or on a break during a long hike. Building a community creates a safety net. It gives you a network of people who know you, who will notice if you start to pull away, and who can offer support. It rebuilds the sense of belonging that loneliness eats away. Remember, Mark, The 48-year-old who lost his factory job and couldn't pick up that counseling number, here's what could have saved him. If just one person in his life had pushed past the surface. If his wife had said, "I know you say you'll handle it, but I need you to talk to me." If one of his work buddies had texted, "Hey man, plant closing hit me hard too, wanna grab coffee?" If his doctor had asked one more question beyond "how's your mood?" That's the power of what we're talking about. These aren't abstract strategies. They're the difference between Mark staring at that phone number alone and Mark picking it up because someone reminded him his life has value. The third step is a call to action for everyone. Whether you're struggling or not, learn to listen. If we're asking men to be brave enough to speak, we have to be brave enough to hear them. When a man in your life opens up to you, that's a sacred moment. Your job isn't to fix him. You don't need all the answers. In fact, jumping in with advice or cliches like cheer up can make him feel dismissed. The most powerful thing you can do is just listen, without judgment, with empathy. Ask open-ended questions like, "That sounds really hard. Tell me more about it." Or "How has that been affecting you?" Validate his feelings by saying, "It makes total sense that you'd feel that way." Create a safe space where he knows his vulnerability will be met with respect. Often, just being heard is profoundly healing. Finally, we have to destigmatize and embrace professional help. Here's what I want you to do right now. Literally pause this video, open your phone, add 988 to your contacts, not because you need it today, but because if you ever do, you won't have to Google suicide hotline while your hands are shaking. You'll just see a name in your phone that says someone who will listen. These aren't government bureaucracies. The Samaritans, Lifeline, 988. They're trained humans who've heard it all and won't judge you. They're the friend you can call at 3 a.m. when you can't burden the people who know your name. And therapy, think of it this way. You wouldn't try to fix your car's engine by staring at it really hard. You'd get a mechanic. Your mind deserves the same expertise. A therapist is a professional for your mind and emotions. They are a trained, objective expert who can give you tools to navigate tough emotions and build healthier ways of coping. Governments are starting to get this. In the UK, a new suicide prevention strategy was launched in 2023, and the government just launched its first ever men's health strategy for England, with a specific focus on suicide prevention and millions invested in projects for middle-aged men. These are positive steps, and there are incredible organisations on the front lines doing life-saving work, available 24/7, offering free confidential support. Online resources like Heads Up Guys provide information and tools specifically for men struggling with depression. We need to normalise using these resources. Talking about seeing a therapist should be as normal as talking about going to the dentist. Putting a crisis helpline in your phone should be as standard as having 911. The solution isn't one single thing, but a cultural shift built on these individual actions. It's the courage to speak, the compassion to listen, the wisdom to find community, and the strength to ask for professional help. It's the understanding that true masculinity isn't about being an unbreakable fortress, but about having the resilience to weather life's storms, and knowing that the strongest structures are the ones that are flexible and supported. The silence is breaking. It's our job, all of us, to make sure what follows is a conversation of hope, healing, and life. Call to action. If this video resonated with you, I need you to do 3 things before you click away. 1. Share this. Not tomorrow, right now. Text it to one man in your life who seems fine, because fine is the most dangerous lie we tell. 2. Check in on someone today. Not how are you. Ask how are you really. Then wait. Don't fill the silence. Let them answer. That 5-second pause could be the moment they finally tell the truth. 3. Use the comments below. If you've struggled with this, say it. If you've lost someone, honor them. If you're a man reading this and thinking that's me, type, "I see this." That's it. 2 words. Let this community remind you that you're not invisible. Don't wait until you're at a funeral wishing you'd asked. Conclusion. This crisis was built by silence. It will be dismantled by conversation. We've seen the cost: 14 men a day in the UK alone. Fathers, sons, brothers, friends, gone because they believed the lie that strength means suffering alone. But we've also seen the path forward. It's not complicated. It's one conversation, one text, one moment of courage to say, "I'm not okay," or "I'm here to listen." This isn't a problem with men. It's a problem with the impossible expectations we've placed on them. And because it's a societal problem, the solution requires all of us. The silence has been broken, the conversation begins now, and it begins with you.